Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. My big takeaway from today is that colon cancer rates are on the rise for younger people. According to Keith, he thinks it's driven by a lack of activity. Maybe younger people are gaming more. They're just not walking. They're not riding their bikes. And so when you have an increase in weight, you have an increase in inflammation, and inflammation can drive stimulation of cancer cells. And you're going to have to tune in today to find out my other shocking takeaway, which has to do with drinking hot beverages. I have to tell you, I drink hot beverages all day long because I live in Seattle and it's cold. So you got to tune in to hear the rest of Keith's tips. Okay, Keith Bishop, retired pharmacist, clinical nutritionist, and wannabe cowboy. Do I have that right?
Well, yes, I do cowboy work. I ride horses. I have horses. So I've kind of converted from the city life to the country life.
You sure have. And we're going to jump into so many things because I have to tell you right off the bat, you kind of pick on some of the foods that I love in response to, can some of these foods contribute to cancer risk? But we'll jump into that in a second. But what I want to ask, you've been in the health field for 30 plus years.
Yeah, since 1977.
1977. How have you seen cancer rates change? Or the cancer landscape, we'll call it. How have you seen that changed since the 70s?
There's more understanding and earlier diagnosis. It's not so much of seem like a late stage. Not quite as bad. So it used to be colon cancer. It was like, oh no, that's serious because nobody was getting a colonoscopy and not following through with the doctors and things like that. Now the screenings are more frequent, and even in senior adults, the colon cancer risks are going down. Breast cancer, I think the rates are going down a little bit, and so that's good news. And but overall, it's not that much of a change. I think it's still kind of flat because we have some other groups, like some young people, that are getting more cancer now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you and I had a little bit of a discussion earlier about that. So it seems like colon cancer's on the decline for older folks like ourselves.
Yes.
But it's increasing in younger folks. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I believe what's happening, and when I kind of look at the younger people that I work with and grandkids and great-grandchild, their life is quite different. And so what they eat and their activity level. So I remember, when I was a kid, I had to walk to school in the snow, uphill, barefoot,
poor
kind of things. So, but it's quite different now because everybody drives everywhere. And I did have to walk to school. It was 1.5 miles. I did have to walk to school or ride my bike and things like that. Well, now everybody drives everywhere. Mostly they're not as active. They're doing a lot more gaming and computer type activities and sitting. And that creates excess body weight along with the food issue I'll get into in just a second. Increased body weight, which creates inflammation. And inflammation is a cancer driver. And so body fat cells create inflammation, including IL-6 and such, that stimulates cancer growth. So that's part of it. And then also what they're eating is not quite as healthy, a lot more fast food. And when I was a child, we didn't go out to eat. I mean, it was rare. And mom, fixed meals. My grandparents fixed meals at home. We did not go out to eat. And now it's like that. Now they don't eat at home.
It's really true. It's flipped. Absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying in the last, 40, 50 years, activity has changed dramatically, but also our food consumption has also changed dramatically.
It is dramatically different. A lot more junk food and stimulant drinks, and instead of water. We didn't, as a child, even we didn't have soda pop. I mean, it was rare to have a soda pop.
Yeah. It's exactly right. And soda was, okay, maybe we'd get a soda after church on Sunday, when we went out for our one meal of the week.
It was diet and lifestyle. And maybe a couple of supplements might have an impact, but it was like what we were eating and activity level. And that was a shock.
Yeah.
And so then I have a couple of uncles that have had prostate cancer. So there's a genetic tendency for many cancers, and that is one of them. And my brother, and then my mother, actually, she ended up dying of brain cancer.
Oh, my gosh.
And my father had died of Alzheimer's. So the brain's very important to me. So the cancer risks, stimulated my interest. And so while my mother had cancer is when I started doing my research. And so that was in 2008. And I started publishing information about cancer type things and about things that, we need to be careful about. Yeah, she loved soda pops.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the link to sugar and cancer?
Yeah, that is a controversial topic. And there are some people on the internet that are saying, oh, sugar doesn't make a difference. And then others are saying, yes, it does. And some say that sugar doesn't feed cancer, and others say that it does. But cancer does use various different chemicals from our body for energy. And sugar is one of those. Glucose is one of those ingredients. So sugars, in soda pop, for example, in women and in men, essentially it's about the same ratio, but even just one soda pop a day increases the risk of breast cancer by like 30 to 40%.
Oh my gosh.
And so, matter of fact, years ago, I had a sales rep that came into the pharmacy, and he was starting to have some concerns about prostate cancer. His PSA was going up. He was a young Hispanic man, and I told him that fact, and he was drinking like 2 or 3 soda pops every day. He stopped the soda pop, and his PSA went down.
Gosh, that's shocking.
Yeah, it is. And so, but there, 11 teaspoons of sugar in a soda pop.
Right around there. American Heart Association says we can have, I think women can have 4 to 5 teaspoons of sugar a day. Men can have around 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. So you have one soda, and that's 2 days worth of sugar. Yeah,
exactly. And that's just too much. And so that does feed things. It also does increase the weight gain, the body fat gain, and body fat makes inflammation chemicals. So sugars are a definite concern. Here in Oklahoma, sweet tea means like syrup.
You pick on some of my favorite foods. So let's talk about that, because I don't want to get cancer again. But you can see me, I'm drinking hot tea. Love my hot tea. Hotter the better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Okay.
Tell me about this, Keith. Why? No.
The hot. It's the hot. It's the extremely hot. The boiling temperature is too hot. And if once you make your tea and brew it, let the tea bag in there after about 5 minutes, the temperature is going to drop to a drinkable temperature unless you have that insulated top on it to hold the temperature in while you're brewing it. But if you let it cool off a little bit, it's not going to be as much of a concern. The hot beverage, when we swallow it, at first, the mouth seems to be able to handle that pretty good. But the esophagus is more sensitive to it. And it's kind of like a sunburn. And if we keep damaging that with that hot beverage and burn the esophagus tissues repeatedly, then those cells are going to grow and repair like a sunburn. A repeated sunburn year after year after year increases the risk of skin cancers. Well, we get the same type of concern for the throat. And so it's just, it's not like you shouldn't have hot beverages. We have to be careful about the temperature. And so one general rule is I just say, well, if you're brewing it or coffee, if you let it sit for just a couple of minutes, it's okay. Boiling is too hot, but if there's steam coming off of it, it might be too hot. Actually, stainless steel is okay, not plastic.
Yep, that's what I'm drinking out of a stainless steel
Okay, good.
cup right now without the lid, because here's the other issue: is the lid is plastic.
Yes.
So then the steam goes north, hits the lid,
right?
Grabs onto all that junk that's in the plastic and drops it back into your beverage. So I try to not use the lids too much unless I'm driving and there's a chance of a spill. But so it sounds like I still can drink my hot tea or hot coffee,
definitely.
But make sure that it's not so hot that it's gonna burn my esophagus.
Correct. Yes, and so the major thing of all of this, everything we're talking about is first of all, we don't have to be perfect, but it's the day in and day out, or several times a day. That's what creates the problem. So yes, if occasionally you have that extremely hot beverage, that's okay. But if you do it every day for years, daily, now we've got a problem. Or occasionally with your cup, if you had that plastic top on it, and I do the same thing, driving to work, I'm going to have that. But it's not like I do that all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about another one, red meat. I grew up on a farm, Northern California, and I like my red meat.
Yes.
And my potatoes. That was our Sunday night dinner.
That's right. And so I was raised the same way, in Oklahoma. It's oil and gas and cattle. That's our income, for the state. And matter of fact, the red meat, is a risk factor. It's not like you have to be perfect on this, but red meat itself is a risk factor. It may be due to chemicals that can be in it. So free range is the preferred choice. That's what I do. And it's not like I avoid red meat, but I don't eat it every day. And then, and then in the feed type things, they often will give estrogens to create a faster weight gain in the feedlots. And so that creates tissue growth and fat marbleizing in the meats, tissues. So if you can get free range, that's going to be the best option. But probably one thing that's probably even more important is usually that meat is often cooked to done. It's grilled at a high temperature. It's charred, and that browning and charring and blackening, that's cancer-causing chemicals, hydrocyclic amines and polycyclic amines. And genetically, for some people, and matter of fact, myself, a genetic test, that is a risk factor for me. So therefore, I limit, don't avoid, but I limit. And then also, when I do cook a steak, I cook it at a very low temperature, turn it frequently. We marinate it with herbs like rosemary and such.
Rosemary can knock the risk down of the carcinogenic. Yeah.
It really can. And so we'll do a marinade of that and be very careful about the temperature and eat it medium rare. And because if it's overcooked, that is a major problem. So there's one other thing. There is a sugar in meat that might be a contributor factor, but I think that really it's the fact that the way the meat is cooked at too high of a temperature might be the major factor. So it's not just grilling outside, like I'm talking about, but even pan frying or browning, anything, or oven and broiling. So anytime you over brown anything, we're actually running into a risk of increased cancer risks.
Okay. So perhaps it's not the red meat itself. It's the cooking process.
Yes.
And the growth process, it sounds like, with growth hormones and the estrogen, which is never a good thing coming into your body from a protein source.
Right. So, we have potatoes, it is a starch, and there are some concerns about keto diets and paleo and not. And so research does show that people have a tendency to do better. If they have cancer, they have a tendency, and going through treatment, they have a tendency to do better if they're doing keto.
Okay.
Now, but traditionally that means meat. But once again, the white foods have a tendency to, like rice and potatoes and pasta, flour, sugar have a tendency to provide those carbohydrates and sugars, like we first mentioned, which can help feed cancer cells. So the potatoes, it's not like we never have potatoes. If you're going to have meat, it'd be 1 palm of meat and then 2 palms of vegetables.
Great.
That's enough food to get you by for 3 or 4 hours without creating excess weight gain or body fat gain, and provide all the basics. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you can definitely do legumes, but it takes at least probably more like 2 palms of legumes, and then you still got 1 more palm. So in my mind, anytime I'm eating, I'm thinking about that 3 palm rule to keep from going overboard.
Tip. Yeah, I love that. Okay. And eating slower too.
Yes,
that makes a big difference. Yeah,
it takes 20 minutes to get full.
It does.
And so whether you're eating just a plain green salad or if you're, eating, meat, it takes 20 minutes to get full.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yes. And so it's also, my dad, bless his heart, he used to talk about my husband and how fast my husband eats, because my husband was in the Army, and he said, you don't have much time to eat. So you just kind of inhale, and he's working on it. But it's funny when I eat with him, which of course is every day, I find that I kind of start to mimic how he eats. And so I have to slow down, kind of center myself, put my fork down between each bite, or at least, don't keep shoveling. And I feel better when I don't eat so fast. I've had issues with digestion. I've had GERD before. I was diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus. So I need to be careful of, my digestion. So I do a lot of great things to support that, and eating slower is one of them. And
the social aspect is important too. So if you're with people and visiting, it's easier to go slow.
That's really true. Yeah, that's really true. Well, you bring up another topic about how much liquid you should be drinking. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, especially with your digestive issues. And so the stomach, if you really look at it, and at my desk at my office, I have a picture of a stomach, or a model of a stomach on my desk. It's the size of your fist. Your stomach is not very big. And if you eat your 3 palms of food or more, and you add a lot of liquid in, now your stomach is expanding. So a few things are going to happen. And one could be increased risk of reflux, because your stomach's only so big. It actually is kind of like a muscle. It is a muscle type tissue. And if you bend over, move a certain way, it's just going to have a tendency to squish up into the esophagus. And the esophagus is not made for acid. And the stomach is. Now, the stomach is hydrochloric acid manufacturing plant. It's supposed to be there. It can handle it. And matter of fact, when that acid is there, the cardia, the top part of the stomach, and the lower esophageal sphincter, both of those close to keep food from coming up into the esophagus and creating the reflux issue. But if you drink too much water, you dilute down your food, your minerals, and the acid in the stomach. So now you're not going to absorb your nutrients as good. You're going to have a greater risk, therefore, of also refluxing. And water is also, it is basically acidic, doesn't have very many minerals in it, so it's going to have fewer minerals. So yes, we only should be drinking enough liquid to just get our food down, and that's it. And you can have that water at another time of the day. An hour or two after you've eaten, you should have digested your food. It should be gone and emptied out. If you're still bloated, feel like food is still sitting in your stomach, you probably don't have enough acid and you're not digesting things right. So it should empty out and such. So, but 2 hours after a meal, go ahead and get the rest of your liquids in.
I think you all know how much I love ButcherBox. Probably the biggest driver for me is the quality. And I love that ButcherBox focuses on small family fisheries, so they know who's fishing for the sockeye salmon. And they also focus on small family ranches where, again, they visit these ranches and they know that these animals are being treated humanely. And that is probably my biggest driver. I also had many of you reach out to me and tell me, hey, I want to try ButcherBox, but I don't want to commit to a full year. So I have great news for you. You can go ahead and use my code and sign up for as long as you want. Of course, right now we're doing the free bison in every box, and you still get the free bison in every box and $20 off of your first box. So all you have to do is go to butcherbox.com/Enos and then use the code Enos. And then you're going to get $20 off of your first order and then free bison in every box for up to a year. This is a great opportunity to just try out ButcherBox without having to commit to 12 months. I have to tell you, I get so excited when I get that delivery box at my front door because I know it's going to be incredibly high quality protein that honestly I can't get at any supermarkets near my home. So give ButcherBox a try. I think you'll love them. Okay, so let's jump on to some of these controversial topics. So I want to talk about, we talked about red meat. I wanted to ask you about eggs, fermented dairy, and dates. I love a couple of handfuls, not a couple of handfuls, 2 or 3 dates after dinner. Oh, yeah. Or I use dates in my green smoothie to give it a little added sweetness. Are dates a good cancer prevention food?
They really are. And so probably the fiber in the date, what decreases the amount of sugars that are in it. It does have each date has 20 or 30, calories, so it has quite a bit.
It has quite a bit of sugar, natural sugar.
The fibers, though, will decrease that impact of the natural sugars. And then something about them, and actually they don't really know why, but people that consume dates have a lower risk of all kinds of cancers.
Okay.
So, and I think it's probably the fiber type thing. So we see a similar type thing actually with all fruits and vegetables. And, matter of fact, if they're dried fruits like dates, they can definitely decrease the risk of cancer essentially. Okay. But we just have to be a little bit more careful about dried fruit being too many calories. And it's easy for me to grab too many of those and eat too many at once. So, 3, 4 dates, for me is probably enough. 20 or 30 calories a piece, that's probably enough. And so we have to be careful about that quantity once again.
Okay. And, yes, so dates are dried. What about other types of dried fruit? I see those at stores all the time, Trader Joe's, dried mango, dried bananas, and... Well,
and so we just have to, we have to read those labels. So I'm very cautious about that. And, my wife, she doesn't like shopping with me because I'm looking at the label and to see what's in it. And often in all those commercial type dried products, they often will add sugars into them to sweeten them up. So we need to read the label. And now, so if it's in a bin and you can't measure it and they don't have that ingredient label, I probably won't get it. But apricots, banana chips even are okay. Matter of fact, I dehydrate all kinds of fruits and to help kind of preserve them. At the pharmacy, we buy fruit for our associates so that they can have something to snack on. But, they don't always eat enough. And so I'll take those bananas that are ripe, bring them home, dehydrate them, take them back up. And they love the chips. And that's a great option, especially if you put a little bit of cinnamon or something like that on there too. So great option. Right.
Isn't there another chemical that's sprayed on dried fruit though to preserve it?
There can be, yes. And I have to admit, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. So
I know. I'll look it up and I'll tag it in the show notes because that's one of the reasons why I don't buy dried fruit other than dates is because it's been sprayed with something and it's a chemical. I mean, I try to just avoid as many chemicals as possible, but
sure, exactly. Limit as much as possible. Right. Exactly. We can't be perfect, but we need to do the best we can when we can.
Okay, let's talk about fermented dairy. And give me a couple of examples of fermented dairy.
Well, cheese.
Oh, okay.
Cheese, yogurt, things like that. So fermented means that they've added a culture to it, whether it be a bacteria or a yeast, mold type culture ingredient, and that actually eats away and digests the lactose typically. And in that process, it becomes thick. Cottage cheese, it becomes thick, lumpy, and in that process actually, for some reason, decreases the risk of cancers. And so there isn't a strong correlation for fermented dairy. Matter of fact, essentially no correlation with fermented dairy products. So whether it be the yogurt or cottage cheese or cheeses, I can't find any consistent issues. There's a couple of studies that may say, oh, there's a little problem. And then there's other studies saying that it's definitely not a problem. So fermented is okay. Since there's a little bit of a question about some of those, I definitely will eat some cheeses, but I don't do it every day.
Okay.
And so I try to limit that quantity. But we also run into the same kind of thing. Is it depends on the dairy source and potential chemicals that are, in the cows.
Right. Or that are added in the processing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about eggs. I love me some eggs.
I've had eggs and I choose not to have chickens anymore. Rather, I've had chickens. I choose not to have chickens anymore.
Really?
So the eggs are they are an egg. And so they have growth factors that help that baby chicken to grow. And it's probably those growth chemicals in that has a tendency to stimulate some growth in our body, cancer cell growth. So, it's kind of like, well, and we haven't talked about milk, but we're going to. So dairy milk and eggs are food for babies. And they help those babies grow, even though they don't eat ideal, whether it be human babies or chickens. They don't eat ideal, but it's amazing how well they grow with those growth nutrients and how fast they grow. Well, after a mammal is weaned, most mammals don't drink milk.
That's
after
true.
Being weaned, okay? And so therefore, we should not be drinking milk. And so milk, like dairy milk, does increase the risk of cancers, and so does eggs. So the milk, same type of thing. Is like, we don't have milk in the house because there's so many alternatives that we can use. All the almond milks and so many options. And unsweetened versions are best. And you can add a little bit of monk fruit or stevia to it to help sweeten it up. And then if a recipe calls for dairy milk and you need the fats that are in that milk, well, you can add a little bit of olive oil into that and bake with that to help get that ratio, correct. So we really don't need to have milk to be healthy.
That is true. Now, eggs, I'm having a hard time getting my head around it. What about, is there a difference between commercially produced eggs, big farm, whatever, commercial feedlot type of eggs versus buying them at my local farmer's market?
I think buying them at the local farmer's market in more like a free range type of thing, if that's what they say that they do, it would be my preference. And we are blessed, actually. So we do occasionally eat eggs, no more than once a week. And we get them from our friends that are in the country. The chickens are out running around, doing their thing and working, free range. They go in every night, lock them in, and keep the coyotes away from them. And so that's okay. But still, I think there's some growth factors. But then commercially grown, they actually add all types of growth factors, to the feed. And there's all kinds of chemicals. Same thing, no matter what the animal is, like salmon. Farm-raised salmon, they're in a cage in the ocean, and they have PCBs in there. How are they getting that? It's in the feed for some reason. I don't understand. But those are done in foreign countries, and they don't have regulations on what's in the food product. Right.
Well, let's... So just to kind of recap, it sounds like you're saying that eggs can still be okay.
Yes, once a week is my preference. Yes.
Once a week. And if best version's going to be, the free range.
Yes.
But what if I'm shopping at, Safeway or Trader Joe's? Do you think I can trust the label when it says free range?
Pretty much so, yes. But there's also now what does cage free and free range mean? So there are definitions on that too. Mm-hmm. So cage free, that means they're just not held in a little tiny 1 foot square cage. So but the labeling is it's a guide. It's not perfect, but it is a guide. Yes, mm-hmm. and would be better than the ones that definitely don't say anything whatsoever about their source or how the animal is treated, anything like that.
Okay, all right. We're gonna finish with probably the most controversial topic of all, specifically when it comes to breast cancer: soy products.
Yes. So I get more hate comments on
I'm sure you do.
talking about this. So and actually, fermented soy is actually the biggest concern, and I'm not sure why that is. They don't know why, but most of these studies are done in the Orient, mm-hmm. not on Caucasians.
Okay. And can you give us some examples before you jump in? What a fermented soy food? Give us an example.
Miso, tempeh. Have to admit, here in Oklahoma, cowboy, I'm not sure.
Not a lot of tempeh in Oklahoma.
Exactly. There's not. And miso, and we do have some restaurants, but they're not very close and type of thing. But fermented means that it is mold and yeast and bacteria, it depends on what type, is added to that culture once again, and then it grows and thickens the product. Yeah. So they start off with more like a milk type of a thing. They add the culture to it, like cheese. They add the culture to the cheese to thicken it. Same thing with these fermented soys. But a couple of these soy products actually have a lot of salt in them. Now, that salt, also high salted foods, increases the risk of cancer significantly. So some of these fermented soy products can actually have more than half and close to the full daily requirement of sodium in a serving. Okay. So if it's a salty type food, and whether it be soy or not, we need to be more careful about that.
Okay.
So fermented, seems to be the major issue, and the fermented and salted fermented soy products increase the risk of gastric cancers.
Okay.
So I think it's more like a stomach issue.
Okay.
Or the stomach and salt, the salt issue. Salt, issue for the gastric cancers, the stomach cancers.
Gotcha.
And then on regular soy products, most of the studies are done with people that live in the Orient. And their lifestyle is different. Their culture is different. For generations, they've been consuming these foods. And there's very few Caucasian studies. So we definitely have to consider this, because there are also another factor. So it's kind of like a maybe a racial type thing, meaning some people are different, but also just where a person lives is different. So the ingredients, the active ingredients, which have some estrogenic type activities in the soy products, our body's bacteria in the gut actually change that into a chemical called equal. Equal is a hormone, and equal can increase the risk of cancers for some people genetically. But it's the bacteria in the gut that's creating the problem. So we used to think years ago, when this controversy was first coming up about soy, I remember when soy was great. Everybody should be eating soy.
Right.
And then they say, oh, well, maybe not. Well, it may be due to the bacteria balance that's in our gut. And so even in different countries in the Orient, they can have different bacteria balances. And so no matter what part of the country, even in the United States, each region has kind of like different bacteria cultures in their guts.
Very true. Yeah.
So that's why traveling, sometimes we can get constipated or we can have diarrhea, because the bacteria that we're exposed to is different. So the end point about soy is that soy milk and soybeans and tofu consumed occasionally is not a problem. But it's not been well studied in Caucasians. Now, there are some studies showing in children, actually children born to women that did consume a lot of soy products. And I think this was a Caucasian study. The mom was consuming soy. She had a baby. The baby grew up to be an adult. She had more problems with her uterus, like uterine fibroids were worse. Oh. So, and it's typically estrogens that stimulate the uterine fibroids. So estrogens are stimulating. They stimulate the endometrial lining to develop. Progesterone is the more calming, anti-cancer type chemical, where estrogens are more stimulating and cancer-causing type chemical. So there are some unknown issues, associated with that. So therefore, when I go out and I have an opportunity to have a soybean product or in my salad or tofu, I do love the taste of tofu, and I will consume it. But it's kind of like the red meat thing. I'm not going to do it many times a week. So it is a great option.
Yeah, it sounds like it continues to be a controversial topic.
Yes.
What I've heard also is that soybeans are the most genetically modified agricultural product in our country, at least probably the top 3. And so if you do consume soy, make sure it's always organic and try to eat it in its most natural form possible, which is going to be the soybean, the edamame.
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
And going for the non-GMO.
Right, non-GMO organic.
Exactly. And it's the best way.
Yeah, and that's the best way. Okay.
Trying to find that is a challenge. So it's more like a health food store, or a higher end store maybe to find that.
Right. I actually buy organic non-GMO soybeans at Costco.
Oh, okay.
In the frozen department. And so, and I do have a little bit of soy, a few times a week, and it's usually in the form of soybeans, and it's a snack. It's high protein, high fiber. There's so many interesting things about it. And I've read enough research that I think it's safe for me.
Yes, I think it is. But once again, just not too often, not every single day.
Okay.
Is the main thing that in my mind.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as we wrap up, do you have any additional advice to share with me about how I can avoid cancer moving forward?
I think probably, the number one thing is being physically active. Well, I'm not an expert in this, but I think we have to be physically active and make the better choices on our food. Okay. And so, I do use some supplements to help with the different aspects and certain things that we know are an issue. It depends on stage of treatment and things like that. But we have to be more physically active, and we have to make those little changes, like that soda pop thing. We've got to be careful about that, the sugars, and be careful about overcooking the meat. Right. And so it's every little step that we can make decreases that risk. Okay. Yeah, that's really good advice, because I think about friends who love soda, and so can they go from 3 sodas a day down to 2? And then you go down to 1, or even sweet tea versus non-sweet tea. Can you do half and half? Great place to start.
It's a great place to start. And so all progress is good. And baby steps are fine, because sometimes it is really hard to just rip the Band-Aid off and say, okay, I'm done with sugar. Right. I'll never eat it again. And of course, as soon as you make a statement like that, that's all you want is sugar for the rest of the day.
Exactly. Yes. So I've been working on this since 2008. Yeah. And I'm not perfect. Yeah. And so I do enjoy these foods that we've been talking about, but we just can't do them all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, now I'm going to end one more time. Okay. I do this a lot, so you'll get used to me. We're moving into the weekend here. Can I have any alcohol?
Oh, this is unfair. Actually,
sorry, Keith.
It's unfair. And the unfair is actually for you. And is that actually, for some reason, women, even just one alcohol drink a day increases the risk of breast cancer.
Okay.
Even one drink. So it needs to be a alcohol-free option.
Okay.
So it doesn't make a difference, even as we call the healthy red wine type thing. For women, that does increase risk of breast cancer. And there's some genetics involved in that. Men and women have the same hormones, same type of effects even, although guys don't have babies, but same kinds of effects. But men can have one drink without it increasing their risk of, whether it be for men, breast cancer or prostate cancer. But more than one drink does increase the risk of cancers. And there are certain types of alcohol that I'm more concerned about, and that's going to be alcohol. I haven't posted things about this yet, but darker colored or tinted alcohol, like bourbons and whiskeys and things like that, they're aged in burnt barrels.
Oh, that is so interesting. Okay.
So now,
so there's those chemicals in that burnt.
Exactly.
Just like it might be on a steak that's, really grilled hot. Okay.
So genetically, some of us have a problem with that. So I don't do those type of alcohol drinks anymore.
Okay.
Now, wine may also be a similar type issue. Some wines are also aged in some burnt barrels. So I think we have to be a little bit more careful if we have a history, a family history like me, or personal history about some of those burnt products and like burnt barrels, for example.
Right. Fascinating. Okay, we could go on for another hour, but I just want to thank you so much for coming on Why Did I Get Cancer? You've really given me a lot to think about. And
you still like me?
Pardon? Do I what?
You still like me? You still like me?
I still like you. But I think what's really important here is for people to do their own due diligence. You've heard this information and now do a little bit of reading about it. So I know that I really encourage you to follow Keith on Instagram. And so I'm going to tag you in the show notes. Because you publish a lot of, you publish the studies that you're reading. So I'm going to get a few studies of those from you, and we'll publish those in the show notes so people can see, all right, so here's his information about soy. Here's his information about fermented dairy or dates or soda and sugar. And I think that just allows us all an opportunity to just take a little deeper dive into how this works for your body, because everybody's body is different.
It is. That is correct. Genetically, we're different.
Yes. Okay. Well, thanks, Keith. Great chatting with you. And yes, I still like you.
Okay, good.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I've got my shopping guide for all of my cancer self-care items in the show notes, along with information about today's guest and our show sponsors. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you never miss an episode. Keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a gal that got diagnosed with cancer and wanted answers. If you need medical advice, please be sure to consult with a medical professional. And thank you for listening.